To this day, aside from yourself, has anyone sort of made that correlation looking back? Let's say this other doctor 15 years later, the one who put you on these steroids and said that would have been that, I'm glad you didn't. That was wrong. I admit that. I see that now. Would that doctor, if you show the steroids, or maybe you have showed these results and the records, would they show any correlation that the vaccine might have been the cause of your juvenile rheumatoid arthritis?
No, I've heard the word coincidence so many times.
Right.
I don't really have much contact with conventional doctors anymore. That specific rheumatologist, she passed away a long time ago. The one I was with her from the age of 2 until the age of 4, and then I was passed on to another rheumatologist who took care of me from 4 until 18, when I left her because of the medication that she'd put me on that we can get onto, that nearly killed me. But even so I contacted her in recent years because I held so much resentment towards what I felt she had done, but also to say that not everything is about statistics and not everything is about, there is so much more to it. And she kind of apologized actually, but wasn't able to, she didn't make any correlations or agree that. She just kind of gave me the scientific lingo of what she, it was just very much bypassing what I'd suggested.
I mean, I know that doctors are in some ways made to kind of disconnect from that emotional experience side of a patient and the evidence, the clinical research, and to be very, logistic like. And it makes it difficult, I think, for a doctor to really admit that, even when it is a little bit blatant in certain circumstances. Not to say across the board, everyone has a different, unique one. Your experience, though, and everything you started at such a young age and went through, I mean, you can't discount the experience, is what I'm saying. And your experience was one that I think was very, blatant in many ways. And you saw the differences of the choices your parents made versus the apologies years later, and all the correlation and connecting the dots isn't too difficult in some cases. Coincidences, I understand coincidence, but in many ways there is a ABC to this all that sort of makes sense. And in your case, it seems to be that way. Now, you have this, childhood where you're struggling. You have these injections. You're kind of, balancing out, I would say, somewhat maybe with the homeopathy there that is able to keep you somewhere. But what was, let's say, your teenage years going into young adulthood? What did that look like?
Right. So that's where everything really changed. So my teenage years, my high school years were my best years. I had 4 really good years where I was super healthy. I had maybe 1 flare up a year, but very manageable, to the point that my husband and I, we were in the same class in school together. We only got together years later, but he didn't know that I had arthritis. So that's how well I was. Whereas when I was in primary school, all the kids in my primary school, if I ever meet them now, they always go, "How's your arthritis?" It was a big thing then. So I got through high school, which was great because those years are really difficult years as it is without having a disability. And I left school to go to performing arts school, and everything changed. It seems like out of nowhere. I just got a huge flare up, both in the joints and the eye. And I stopped having the mobility that I'd had since I was kind of 12. Obviously I had the flare ups, but generally I'd had this mobility, and the rheumatologist was saying, it's burning itself out, which it can do at adolescence. And so it came back, and the big concern was the eye. So my ophthalmologist, who I had been with since I was 2, said, "You're growing cataract over cataract over cataract, and it's pushing against the optic nerve." And so the pressure had dropped to 0, and pressure should be something between kind of 13 to 20, something like that. And there was so much inflammation in the eye. So it was a catch-22, because she said, "We can't operate to remove these cataracts and take and increase the pressure while there's that much inflammatory activity in the eye." Now, what was it that caused those cataracts? It was the steroid eye drops. They said, well, it could be a combination between the eye drops and the inflammation. But so she said to me, and my joints were flaring at the same time, and I was just kind of embarking on this new life, and I was applying to universities, and I was a young adult and things were like going well until they just stopped going well, literally overnight. And so she'd said to me, alongside my rheumatologist, we have to operate on this eye. We have to do this operation because you could lose your eye if we don't. And there was a valid, I could have done. There was so much going on in that eye with the pressure being so low, pushing against the optic nerve. It was very scary. And I was 17. And she said, we need you to go on methotrexate, which for those listening is a chemo-based drug, which they give alongside folic acid, synthetic folic acid, which anyone who knows about MTHFR, which I didn't at the time, will know that that is the perfect storm. So I said to my parents, well, I'm an adult now. And, what has the homeopathy done? It's obviously done nothing. Look at me. I'm in this situation because, I was that teenager. And I'm gonna take the drug. The other stuff hasn't worked. And when this kind of started, between the time that this started and actually taking the drug, I knew that this kind of disability was looming. And so I did everything I possibly could to rebel and try and escape.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just like the years of all of it building up until this point of, wow, what sort of childhood have I had and what has happened here and what's going to happen to me? And so I started doing drugs and I just rebelled and I got in with a bad crowd. And then there were many traumas that happened because of that I subsequently have spent years working through. And that probably sped up the process of the disease getting worse and worse until the point that I couldn't function anymore and I was too sick and I decided to do the drug, the methotrexate. So within 3 months of taking the methotrexate, I was really ill. I mean, I could not function. I couldn't get out of bed. I was feeling sick. I had ulcers all over my body. It was as if someone had taken some sort of machine that takes energy out of you and the energy was removed from my body. I was just not operating optimally. And I mean, far from optimally, and then within 10 months, where I had started with arthritis in 4 joints, the knees and the ankles, within 10 months of being on methotrexate, the arthritis was in every joint in my body. So from my jaw right down to my toes. And I couldn't feed myself because I couldn't bend my elbows to get to my mouth or grip cutlery. I couldn't chew food because my jaw was too stiff. And I couldn't even sit up straight because my hips were too stiff. So I was just lying in bed kind of at an obtuse angle until someone would come in and move me and feed me and take me to the toilet. And that I was 18. And so that, yeah. But the irony of it is that after 10 months of taking methotrexate, the eye was no better at all. So they still couldn't operate. And my mum wheeled me into the rheumatologist, this one I'd been with since I was 4. And she didn't bat an eyelid at me being in a wheelchair. And I was obviously, 18 years old with all this pent up anger and frustration. And I was sad. And she didn't even look twice. And she'd been seeing me since I was 4. And she called me Laura instead of Lauren. And I lost it. Because she then went on to say, well, methotrexate works for 70% of people, for 30% it doesn't. And I just lost it. I said, I'm not a statistic and I'm not going to be treated as one. I was 18 and I had no idea how the human body worked or how pharmaceuticals worked or why any of this was happening yet. But something in me did know that there is so much more to how the human body works and how the human body adjusts to allopathic medicine than statistics. I knew there was a lot more to it than that. And so I left her office and never went back there again. So that was that was that part of the story.
I mean, it's really heartbreaking to hear that. And, it's one of the things that I've always said, being in medicine, one of the things I'd love to change about medicine is to humanize it again. That idea when you walk in to not budget, at all and just see someone suffering and just spit out statistics at someone
Right.
who's truly in agony and not even humanized, show no emotion or anything. And again, I kind of understand that doctors need to disconnect in some ways and not get over involved. But everyone's a human here. You should be treated personally and with some humanity and some emotion, and understand that what someone's going through. Have some empathy as a doctor. That's how you build trust. If you treat everyone as a machine as a doctor, I think that's why you look at how people kind of, and I have to say, I don't even know why most people trust doctors anymore. We should have lost a lot of trust for them, but we don't have a lot of respect anymore. Also, I have to say, for doctors, and in some ways they did that to themselves, right?
For me, it was just like, it's as if a person's experience just isn't valid because it wasn't recorded in a lab as a scientific study. And that's what gets to me. Empirical evidence is still evidence. If someone has undergone something and experienced something, that has happened. That is a fact. And if there are a series of events that lead up to that can show some correlation between what's happening, for example, from the age of 2 to the age of 18, or let's say 17, when I started the drug, I had arthritis in only 4 joints. Within 10 months of taking the drug, it was all over my body. Now, that wasn't recorded as a scientific study in a lab, but that doesn't make it any less valid that that is a truth.